All right. And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and get things rolling overall. Cool. Hey, everybody. Let's see. All right. Make sure it's all working. Looks good. Let me know if you can't hear me. You should be able to hear me, but let me know if you can't. All right. And we'll just do this for the moment. So hey everyone, my name is Nathan Smith. I'm the Digital Programming Coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. Thanks so much for joining me again for Excel Part 2 this time. Glad to have you here, and I hope you enjoy it. Hope you get a lot out of it. Before we get rolling, just the usual preliminary bits here. I always like to say at the beginning of class, if at any point you have questions, oh good, glad you can hear me. Thanks for confirming. If you ever have questions, please speak up and let me know. Don't worry about it if it feels like it might be a silly question. Nobody's going to judge you on that. The point of a technology class is for you to learn something useful about technology. So if that's what's happening, we're good to go. If you are confused about what I'm saying, then that's a problem. So I want to make sure that we tackle those questions as they come up. Those of you who are here in the classroom, of course, can ask, just ask. Those of you who are joining me on Zoom, feel free to drop those questions in the chat at any point. I'm not going to be bothered by interruptions, so please just put them in there whenever you have those questions. If you are joining me via live stream on Facebook or YouTube, drop those questions in the comments or the chat respectively, and I'll see those as well, and I can tackle those questions. Let me go ahead and throw my screen share back up there. So this is the address where you, up at the top there is the address where you'll find the example files if you want to download them to follow along. Basically just follow that link, cals.link/excel-2-files, and that'll take you to a place where you can download those files, and then you just open them up in Microsoft Excel like you would any other file. So let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Let me know if there are technical problems, of course. That way we can make sure those get tackled as quickly and cleanly as possible, so nobody's confused and watching me just kind of run my mouth with no actual sound coming out. And I guess that's about it. So let's see. All right, I've got my notes here in front of me. Everything's good to go. Let's get rolling. Okay, so class today is Excel Part 2. What we're going to do is basically just pick up where we left off. We're going to talk about formulas, some of the basics of formulas, and we're going to dig more deeply into formulas. We are going to talk about how to use formulas to work with dates, and how to use copy and paste and autofill and some other key useful things. And then, oh yeah, we're going to tackle charts at the end as well. So, so let's get into it. Okay, so here in the classroom, I'm going to open up the classroom files folder. I'm going to double click on the Microsoft Excel folder, and I'm going to double click part2.xlsx. There we go. Okay, so this is our example file. We ended up on the wrong sheet here, so I am going to come down here and click on the basic math sheet down in the bottom corner there so that I get the correct information, or so that I get the correct example data to start with. Let's see. Give me just a moment here. Let me make sure we're all All right, um, so I've clicked on this basic math sheet down at the bottom, in the bottom left corner here. We're going to start here. This will look familiar if you were here yesterday. It's the exact same data set that we had before. And what we're going to do is we're going to quickly run through some refreshers and just get back up to speed to where we were, since hopefully we've all slept since yesterday. And, you know, might be some things that we're a little rusty on. So up at the top here, the formula that we wrote yesterday was a formula to calculate the total income number for all of these salespeople. And the way that we did that was we went up to cell C2, clicked in the formula bar, hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula, and then we typed the word sum, S-U-M, as in the answer to an addition problem. Then we hold Shift to open a set of parentheses here. Shift 9 gives us our left parenthesis. And then inside the parentheses, you've got number 1, comma, number 2 in square brackets, comma, dot, dot, dot. So that's your, this is a little hint system that Excel has built into it. We'll talk about this a little more here in a sec, but I just want to point out to you that it's there for the moment. So inside the parentheses, what we're going to do is type C4 colon C100. Yeah. Sure, what's up? All right, so we've got so up at the top, I clicked in cell C2 here. Up at the top, I put an equal sign, I typed the word sum, S-U-M, and opened a set of parentheses. And then inside the parentheses, I put C4 colon C100. And what that does is it points my formula in Excel to cells C4 to C100. This is our first little refresher here. This is what we call a range of cells in Excel. So a range of cells is just a group of cells that are all together that form either sort of a box or a line, more or less. So, so you'll have, so in this case, it's a line that goes down from C4 to C100 at the bottom. We'll talk about why it's written that way here in a sec, but for now, we're just going to rewrite it so that we get, so that we recall what's going on. And then at the end here, I'm just going to hold Shift while pressing 0 on my keyboard. That's going to close my parentheses. And now I've got, and then when I press Enter or click the check mark or press Tab or whatever I want to do, I'm going to get $28,727.68. That's our total income number. All right, give me just a moment. All right, so we've got that in there. We've talked about what a range of cells is. Let's go ahead and, let's write a similar formula here in column D for our total expenses. So I'm going to click in cell D2 here up at the top. And then once I've got that cell selected, I'm going to come up here to the top in my formula bar, hit my equal sign again to tell Excel to expect a formula. And then I'm going to type the word sum, S-U-M. Now let's talk about what this is in a little bit more detail. When I type the word sum at the beginning of this formula, what I'm doing is I'm actually using what Excel calls a function. Don't get scared off by the terminology. It's not anything particularly scary. A function, there are a couple of different ways I like to think about it. One of those ways is a function is a trick that Excel already knows how to do, that you don't have to tell it how to do that trick, right? If you think about a dog, if your dog is well trained, then your dog probably knows how to sit, stay, roll over, right? And so if you say Rover sit, then Rover sits, and you don't really have to do anything else. Maybe at the beginning, when Rover, when you first adopted Rover, you had to do some stuff to teach him to sit. But at this point, he knows how to sit, and he doesn't really have to worry about what the mechanics are, and neither do you. You've practiced, and he knows what to do. But Excel, rather than knowing how to sit, stay, roll over, or come, Excel knows how to add and subtract and calculate an average and do statistical analysis. And so functions are those tricks that Excel already knows how to do. You say, Excel, add, and it adds. So that's what happens when I type the word sum. I'm using this sum function, which is the adding trick that Excel knows how to do. Then I'm going to put a left parenthesis next to it. So I'm going to do Shift 9. Functions in Excel basically have, they kind of have three parts, I guess. The first part is the name of the function. In some computer situations, you might call this a keyword. But it's the name of the function. It's basically it's what you want Excel to do, the command to it. Then you have the parentheses. And the parentheses are really important because, one, they tell Excel that the word that's next to those parentheses is not just a word, it's specifically the name of a function. If it doesn't know that, it might treat it as plain text or as something else altogether. In order to use the sum function, I have to type the word sum and I have to add the parentheses. Anytime you have parentheses, you have a left one, you got to have a right one every time. And then inside the parentheses is what we call arguments. This isn't necessary for every single function, as we'll see a little bit later. But typically, your functions are going to need some kind of argument in order to work. Basically, arguments are just the raw materials that your function is using in order to do what it's supposed to do, right? And we talked about, with the metaphor of the dog, you tell Rover to sit and he sits. You tell Excel to add and it adds. But obviously, if you tell Excel to add but you don't give it any numbers to add, that's not going to do anything. It's going to be like, add what? And so what we need to do is we need to put some information in there and tell Excel, these are the numbers that I want you to add together. Those are what we call arguments. They're the information that your function is working with in order to do its job. So in this case, our argument is going to be, all of the numbers, all of the cells that have numbers in them that make up our expenses. So this time we're going to go D4 colon D100. And again, you'll notice it's color-coded here. So I have D4 colon D100 in blue. And then right below, I have a big old long list of cells that are color-coded blue as well. So I know I'm pointing to the right thing. And then once I've got that, entered in, I'm going to close my parentheses. So I'm going to go Shift 0. That's going to give me a right parenthesis here. And when I press enter or click the check mark or whatever, then I get $18,896.13. Let me zoom in a little bit so that it's easier to see. All right, so that's our total income and total expense numbers right there. Okay, so let's go a little further here. This time, what I want to do is I want to get what we call a net total here. And a net total, pretty straightforward. That's going to be a oh, you're very welcome for zooming in, no problem. Glad that's helpful. So your net total is going to be the total income number minus the total expenses number. So we're going to see how far we came out ahead or if we're behind based on these two numbers here. So the easiest way to do that, or well, not the absolute easiest way, I'll show you that here shortly, but one good way to do that is going to be using these two existing formulas and just building on it. So check this out. I'm going to select cell E2 here, and then I'm going to come up to the top in the formula bar and click there again. And then once I'm working in the formula bar, I'm going to do equal sign sum once again. And I'm going to open a set of parentheses. So I'm going to go Shift 9. And then inside my parentheses, again, I'm being prompted for specific arguments. Number 1, number 2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the arguments that I want for this are going to be essentially my two numbers that I'm working on combining, right? My total income number and my total expenses number. So let's go with the total income number first. What I'm going to do is just go C2, because that's the cell that this total income number is in. Column C, row number 2, right? Then I'm gonna put a comma here. So you'll notice I've got number 1, comma, number 2, comma, dot, dot, dot. The comma tells Excel that that's the end of one argument and lets you move on to the next. So your C2 is the first argument. That's the first number or set of numbers that we're combining here. The second one is going to be this, but this says sum here. And if you recall, a sum is the answer to an addition problem. Well, we're actually looking to subtract here because we've got the total income number and we're removing the total, like we're deducting the total expenses from it. So we're doing some subtraction. So what we want to do in order to make this sum function do subtraction is we want to make this number negative. So I'm going to put a negative sign. You can either find it at the top right of the 10-key keypad on the far right of your keyboard, or you can find it next to the equal sign key. Either one works. So I'm going to put a negative sign, and then I'm going to put D2. Then I'm going to hold Shift while pressing 0 again to close out my parentheses. Give myself a right parenthesis there. And I'll just press Enter on the keyboard. And that's going to give me my net total. $9,831.55. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to show you a slightly different way to make this work. Before, we had these two cells with these separate formulas in them. And then we had this one, which kind of builds on it. It just takes C2, which basically is the answer to the total income problem, and then D2, the answer to the total expenses problem, but negative, and puts them together to get our net total. But let's say I didn't have these, or let's say I didn't want to display them, or let's say I didn't want to rely on them. I just want to have it all happen in one formula. I can totally do that as well. Here's how that works. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over here. Actually, I'm going to select cell E2 first, and I'm just going to hit delete on my keyboard. When I do that, it just clears the cell, so there's nothing in there. Then I'm going to come up to the top in the formula bar again, click there, and I'm going to hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. Then I'm going to do the sum function, SUM, just like we did before, and I'll do Shift 9 to open my parentheses. And then inside the parentheses this time, number 1 and number 2 are going to be slightly different. It's not going to be a range of it's not going to be a range of numbers like this. It's not going to be a finished number like this either. What we're going to do is we're going to put another sum function inside there. So I'm going to type the word sum again, and I'm going to do Shift 9 to open another set of parentheses. You'll notice when I do that, the second left parenthesis here has displays in red rather than black. The reason for that is we have a when you have parentheses like the, or as I said before, in Excel, whenever you have a left parenthesis, you have to have a right parenthesis, and so you always want to make sure that you're closing those out at the appropriate times. So what this does is it color codes our parentheses so that we can see when we close a set of parentheses and make sure that our parentheses are in the right spot. Inside the second set of parentheses, what we're going to do is basically we're going to write the formulas that we had over here. So I'm going to go C4 colon C100. And that's going to color code me in blue, just like we did before. And then, once I've got that in place, I'm going to close my parentheses for that one. So I'm going to go Shift 0, and you'll notice I now have a red left parenthesis and a red right parenthesis. All right, then I'm going to put a comma after that. You'll notice when I do that, I'm now being prompted for number 2. I'm being prompted for a second argument inside my original sum function over here. That's because we're putting a sum function inside of a sum function. If you think about one of those Russian nesting dolls, that's what we're doing here, basically. We're nesting one function inside of another. So the second one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a negative sign first. So that's right next to the equal sign on your keyboard. And then I'm going to put one more sum function in there, SUM. I'm going to open a set of parentheses, Shift 9. And then inside that set of parentheses, I'm going to go D4 colon D100. And then I'm going to do Shift 0 to close that set of parentheses. So now I have another another full set of red parentheses. And then I'm going to do Shift 0 again to close the original set of parentheses that went with that first sum function. So I have to make sure, even though that puts two parentheses that are exactly the same side by side, doesn't matter. I got to make sure I close every set of parentheses that I open. So now when I press enter or click the check mark or whatever, I should get $9,831.55, just like I had before, but this time it's being calculated all in this cell. It's not being calculated, or it's not being derived from these two, it's just all in this cell. So you can put as many layers, it is the long way, absolutely. But I show you that to show you how many, or to show you that you can put multiple layers of functions inside of each other, because you're going to need that later on when you're writing more complex formulas that actually do require that to happen. It's not just, in this case, it absolutely is more work than we need to do, but it's a good thing to be able to see, and it's a good thing to be able to see in kind of an easy to understand formula. But yeah, that's a good question, absolutely. In fact, you know what? That brings me to, let me show you the even shorter way to do this. So let's go. Over here, I'm going to put some numbers in. Well, we're going to take kind of a long way to show you the shorter way, but it's going to be worth it, I promise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a few numbers in here. It doesn't really matter what numbers you put, to be honest. I'm just going to come up with some, but we'll put a few numbers over here that we can play around with. Okay, all right, we got some numbers in here. So what I want to do is I want to show you some basic math functions that we can use, in addition to the sum function, which of course we already did, right? So we talked about the sum function a little bit. It's worth, you've kind of seen a little bit of how it works, but I'm going to show you, to start with, a very similar function that does something slightly different. That is the product function. The sum, sum I mentioned is the answer to an addition problem in math. The product is the answer to a multiplication problem in math. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click in one of these cells. In this case, I'm going to use cell H2, but you may not have put the same numbers or in the same place, and that's fine. Just pick a cell, doesn't really matter. I'm going to come up to the top, click in my formula bar, hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula, and then I'm going to type the word product, just like you normally see it spelled. And once I've got the word product in there, I'm going to go Shift 9 to open my set of parentheses again. And inside the parentheses, I'm being prompted for basically the same types of arguments that I needed for the sum function, right? Number 1, comma, number 2 in square brackets. By the way, the square brackets mean that this is optional. You only have to have one number or set of numbers for the product function or the sum function to work. So I'm going to go, let's say that I want to, now let's start out easy. Let's say that I want to do all of these, I want to just multiply all these numbers together. It's going to give me a huge number as the result, but whatever. So it starts in H3 and we go on down to H11. So I'm going to just put that in there, H3 colon H11. And when I close my parentheses, that's basically the whole thing. I can click the check mark or press enter. And sure enough, I get a very, very large number. Let's see. 808,215,408 is what I got. Let's say, though, that I want to only multiply together the single-digit numbers. That's a little more complicated. So let me show you how that would work. I'm going to leave the cell selected, and I'm going to come up here to the top and click in the formula bar again so I can just make changes to the formula. Then I'm going to go backspace until I get H3 colon, like this. And then after the colon, I'm going to say H6. And that's going to give me, excuse me, I'm very wrong about this. Okay, H4 colon H6 is what I want there. Because that's going to give me just those single digit numbers, 6, 3, and 7, right? So I've got those selected or included in my formula. Then I need to get the 9 and I need to get the 2 here. So what I'm going to do is put a comma after that. And the 9 is in cell H9, fittingly. So I'm going to type H9. And you'll notice it's color-coded a different way for me. It's color-coded in red rather than blue. And then we need one more argument to get the 2 in. And that's comma H11. And that's color-coded in purple for me. Then all I need to do is hold Shift and press 0 to close my parentheses, press Enter, and 6 times 3 times 7 times 9 times 2 is 2,268. So you can kind of mix and match in this way. We use ranges of cells over here in these formulas, but you can also just point to individual cells. That's perfectly fine. It's all down to what numbers you want to combine together, basically, or what numbers you need to use in order to achieve the mathematical result you want. Okay, so that's the product function. Let me show you another one. If you're following the trend here, you can probably guess. This is what we call the quotient function. Quotient is the name of the answer to a division problem in math. So let's go ahead and actually, I didn't mean to be editing this. Okay, I'm going to select this cell, but make sure I'm not editing it. Make sure there's no blinking line cursor either up here or in the middle here. And then I'm just going to press delete on my keyboard to clear it out. Then I'm going to come back up to the formula bar, click in there, hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. And then I'm going to type the word quotient, Q-U-O-T-I-E-N-T. That's Q-U-O-T-I-E-N-T. Then I'm going to hold Shift while pressing 9 to open my parentheses. And you'll notice I get something different here. It's not just number 1, comma, number 2 in square brackets, comma, dot, dot, dot. This time I'm being prompted for 2 specific things, no more, no less. You'll notice there's no square brackets here, so neither of these arguments is optional. One of them is the numerator, and the numerator in division is the number you're dividing by. The denominator is the number, the number you're dividing, and the denominator is the number you're dividing by. So we're going to be doing some division here. So let's say, okay, I've got 89. Let's say that I want to divide that by a 9 here. So here's what I'm going to do. My numerator, the number that I'm dividing, is in H4. So I'm going to put that there in my formula. I'm going to add the comma after that. And then, whoops, I was wrong, H3. Sorry about that. Okay, H3, comma. And then my denominator is going to be the 9, which is in H9, as we previously noted. Then I'm going to hold Shift while pressing 0 to close my parentheses. And I just have that quotient, and then in parentheses, H3, comma, H9. When I do that, I'm going to get 9 up here at the top. And some of you who've been doing the math in your head might be a little confused at this point. Excuse me, because 9 times 9 is 81. It's not 89, right? So the quotient function is really useful in particular situations, but you have to know what those situations are. Because what the quotient function does is it divides as you want it to, but it ignores any remainder. So in this case, so you know, if you were doing this in like 4th grade math, what you would do is you'd put 89 under the little house, and then you'd put 9 outside the little house, and then you would divide, and then you would get 9, and then you would write you'd write R8 next to it, because once you divide 9 into 89, the remainder is 8. If you were doing it with a calculator, then you would get 9 point something fairly high, 9.7, 9.8, I don't know, something like that. But the quotient function does not do that. It only deals in whole numbers, and it ignores any remainder. And sometimes that's what you need. If I had a big old pile of 89 chicken nuggets, and I needed to divide them up into 9 nugget boxes, I would only be able to make 9 nugget boxes, right? I couldn't make 10 boxes no matter how hard I tried, because I just wouldn't have enough nuggets. And it wouldn't make any sense to say, oh, I've got 9.92 boxes or whatever. That's not anything. So in that particular situation, you don't want to worry about the remainder. You just want to see how many times that whole number 9 can divide into 89. So that's a quotient function. And it's really useful for situations like that. However, there's another way that you can do this division problem if you want a decimal answer, or if you want to do a fraction or something or whatever. Here's how you do it. Up here, instead of this, well, I'm going to select the cell, and I'm going to press delete again to go ahead and clear out the contents of the cell. Then I'm going to come up to the top, click in my formula bar, and hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. But instead of a function name, what I'm going to do is just go straight into my math here. I'm going to take H3, and then I'm just going to put a slash after that and go H9. So H3 slash H9. What that's going to do is divide the numbers, well, in a slightly different way, as you'll see. When I do that, I get 9.888888889, and so on and so forth. Probably the 8s repeat forever. That would be my guess, or at least very nearly. And so if I wanted a decimal answer to what happens when you divide 89 by 9, this is how I would do it. I would just put the number I'm dividing slash the number I'm dividing by. And you can do this with other basic math operations as well. If I want to add, if I want to add H3 to H9, then what I'll do is get rid of that forward slash, and I'll put a plus sign there. And that gives me 89 plus 9 is 98. If I want to multiply H3 by H9, I'll replace that plus sign with an asterisk. H3 asterisk H9 is going to give me 89 times 9 is 801. Finally, if I want to subtract, I'm going to replace that with just a negative or minus sign. And when I do that, 89 minus 9, of course, is 80. So that's the easiest way to do this. Over here in my in cell E2, if I wanted to replace all of this with something very, very simple, what I'm going to do is just select the cell, press delete on my keyboard, hit my equal sign again, and this time I'm going to go C2 minus D2. Hit enter, and there it is, $9,831.55. Let me show you one more really useful math function, and then I'll get to your question there online. No problem. So the last math function that I'm going to show you is pretty straightforward. And it's the average function, which, as you might imagine, calculates an average based on the numbers that you give it. Let's say that I want to get an average of the total income number over here. I'm just going to put it in one of these cells along the side. It doesn't matter where really. So I'm just going to click in a cell. I'm going to come up to the top and click in the formula bar. I'll hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. And then I'm going to type the word average. Whoops. And hopefully I'm going to spell it correctly. There we go. Got it. I'm going to hold Shift while pressing 9 to open my parentheses. And then, since I'm trying to get the average of these income numbers, what I'm going to do is type, once again, C4 colon C100. I'll hold Shift while pressing 0 to close my parentheses, press Enter. And that's going to give me an average of $1,104.91. Some of you who might be familiar with how to calculate averages might recall how this works. When you're calculating an average, what you do is you add all the numbers together that you're averaging out, and then you divide by the number of numbers there are. So in this case, we've got, let's see, we have 26 numbers that we're averaging out. So we would add all these together, and of course we'd get $28,727.68. And then we would divide that by 26, and that would give us $1,104.91. Now, one key thing to remember here is I wrote C4 to C100 again in this formula. And down here, you'll notice all of these cells are blank. So that in some situations, these blank cells can pose a problem. If in some situations, Excel will treat a blank cell as a 0. And of course, if Excel is treating these cells as zeros, then it's going to be dividing by a lot higher number than if it ignores these blank cells. But in the case of the average function, it does ignore them. And I'll show you how I can tell. If I scroll down here and I put a 0 in cell C30, that's going to give me a lower average over here. Instead of 1,100 and some odd, I now have $1,063.99. So that tells me Excel is treating the blank cells not as zeros, but what in computer world we call a null value. Basically, it's not just 0, it's actually nothing. So I show you that to show you the average function, but also to say you want to be mindful of when you're including blank cells. Sometimes they count as a 0, and sometimes they count as just nothing. So be mindful of that. Play around with it when you're writing your formulas to make sure everything's working properly. Okay, so now, yeah, if you make sure something's in the cell, a lot of times that's the best practice. Absolutely. Good call. Okay, so now to the question that you did ask just then, and a couple of questions that you haven't asked yet, but you might be thinking. So the question that you did ask is, when typing a formula, you always use capital letters. Just curious. So yes, that's right. So when I'm typing Excel formulas, I normally do use capital letters. And the reason for that is that's basically the convention inside of Excel and in Excel documentation. So if you're ever looking something up online, like how do I do whatever in Excel or things like that, you're always going to see the formulas written in capital letters. And if Excel fills them in automatically for you, you're always going to see it in capital letters. So I always do it in capitals just to get you used to the sight of that and just to make it look more standard for me when I'm reading it back later on. You don't technically have to do that, but I find it makes it a little easier to read and it's better for teaching. But that's a great question. Okay, a couple of questions that nobody has asked yet, but I'm sure a lot of folks are thinking. In this formula, two things strike people as odd about the way this works. First of all, these are totals, but they're at the top of the sheet rather than down here underneath all the other numbers. And so the reason for that, well, there are a couple of reasons for that. One reason for that is pretty simple. When I switch over to this sheet, if I want to see what the total is, if it's right there at the top, then I can see it right away without having to scroll down. If I'm looking at a piece of paper where you would normally have the total at the bottom, I really don't have to do much to look at the bottom of the piece of paper versus the top of the piece of paper, right? I just have to move my eyes down slightly. But when I'm looking at this on a screen, there could be thousands and thousands of rows here, and I would have to scroll down to get to the bottom. That's no good. So I always put my totals at the top there because that makes it easy to see without having to scroll down. It's a lot less hassle. The other reason that the reason that it's at the top, and the reason that the formula is written this way, C4 to C100, is because I might add something down at the bottom. Normally folks see this and they're like, why C100? Because starting down here at cell C30, all the cells are blank. But once you get higher, and so why would I include those extra cells? The reason for that is basically if I were to add additional data, if I hired additional salespeople in this particular example, and I added their numbers in, let's say somebody else brings in $1,000 or whatever, then the way this formula is written, it's going to automatically incorporate that. So rather than $28,727.68, now it's $29,000 instead. So yeah, exactly. It makes it easier to add something in. So that way I don't have to worry about that. I can just, I can write my formula and kind of future-proof it. And also, if I had the total down here, then if I wanted to add additional data, I would then have to add additional rows in and rewrite the formula, and then it would work. And of course, I would have to scroll down as well. So it makes it a lot easier on me, all things considered. If I add some extra blank rows that I could fill in later if I want to, and also if I put it at the top rather than at the bottom. Any questions about that before we move on to other stuff? Folks online, if you're typing something, feel free to keep typing. But I'll go ahead and switch over to the copy, paste, and autofill sheet down at the bottom here. And we'll kind of change directions and start with something a little bit different. Okay, so on this sheet, what I'm doing is I'm keeping track of a balance. So in January, I brought in $84 in this balance, and then I spent $54. So I have income and expenses again, but this time I have a balance column over here. And so the first balance cell is just created by subtracting B2, the income number, or subtracting C2, the expenses number, from B2, the income number. Pretty straightforward. Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, I always like to explain why that's at the top, because otherwise folks get confused sometimes. So that's all I'm doing. I'm subtracting 54 from 84, and I get $30, right? So then down here in February, I brought in another $56. I only spent $1, but then I had a previous existing balance of $30 as well. So adding all those together, I get 85. 30 plus 56 minus 1 is 85. Then I can continue on from there and keep calculating that balance in these cells further down. But I don't want to have to rewrite this formula every single time, because that'd be a real hassle. Instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use copy and paste to make new versions of this formula that work on these other rows. Because if I were to write this manually, let me just kind of spell this part out really quick. If I were to write this manually, then what I would have to do is come down here to cell D4 and write basically the same formula once again. But instead of B3, it would be B4. Instead of C3, it would be C4. And instead of D2, it would be D3. And I would have to do that on each and every row all the way down here. And that would be a real annoying. So I don't want to do that. Actually, hang on just a moment. All right, so what I'm going to do, rather than rewrite the formula over and over again, I'm going to copy and paste the formula. So to do that, there are a couple of different ways to go about it. One option is kind of the one that folks tend to default to. I can right-click on the cell, and I can click Copy. That works just fine. Or I can click the Copy button up here, these two little pages at the top. Or my preferred way is to use the keyboard. There's a keyboard shortcut. If you hold Control, CTRL, at the bottom of your keyboard, or if you're using a Mac, the Command key with the little swirly thing that kind of looks like a stove to me. If you hold down on that key and you press C, so Control C or Command C on a Mac, then what it's going to do is give you some dotted lines here around the cell you have selected. What that's going to do is copy the contents of this cell. And then I'm going to come down here, click and hold in cell D4 and drag down to D13. And then I'm going to paste. Now there are a few different ways to paste. You can right click and you can click this little paste button right here, the clipboard with the blank sheet next to it. That works. You can also click this button right here, the little clipboard up at the top. But again, my personal favorite is the keyboard shortcut. In Windows, you hold Control while pressing V as in Victor. Control V. The way I like to remember that is the V looks like an arrow that's pointing to the spot where you want to paste the thing in. On a Mac, it's Command V. The reason I like to use those is they're very convenient when you've learned them, not only in Excel, but those shortcuts work in any program, in all of Windows or Mac OS in the case of a Mac, any program that uses or that allows for copy and paste, pretty much. So once you learn those keyboard shortcuts, which takes a little bit of practice, you can then use those anywhere you want, and you never have to hunt for copy and paste on the screen again. One thing to mention, if for some reason your little dotted lines disappear from around this cell, that means that the cell is no longer copied. It's not like in working with text where you can just copy and then paste it like, minutes later in a completely other program. In Excel, only one thing is copied at a time, and you have to be kind of careful about making sure that it's still copied when you're trying to paste. So if you lose your dotted lines, just click on it again and either press Control C or hit the little copy button, or right click and press copy. Doesn't matter which. Regardless, you can do that, and then when you select the cells, you can paste it on in. There are a bunch of different options under paste here. We're not going to go into most of them. As you can see, it's kind of a bewildering array. But if you accidentally get this menu, click on this one. That's the regular paste. I do encourage you, we won't go into it in the class, but I do encourage you on your own time, if you're interested, to look into the different options for how you paste stuff in Excel. It's pretty useful, rewarding stuff. So recommended, not required. Yeah. Okay, let me show you a different trick here. over here I have January, February, and March listed out here. And I'm going to go ahead and select those cells. So cells A2, A3, and A4. I'm just going to drag over them so that I get all three of them selected. That gives me January, February, March. So I started writing the months, and I want to finish it up, but I don't want to spend all day trying to type every single month name in, because Excel is going to make it easier for me. What I'm going to do is select those three cells, and then you'll notice, well, actually, whenever we, don't follow me on what I'm about to do, but whenever we select a cell, you'll notice there's a little dot down there in the bottom right corner of the cell. So I'm going to reselect these three cells, and there's a little dot there as well. When I move my mouse right over that dot, you'll notice it turns from kind of a block plus sign here into one that's just two straight black lines. When I hold down on my mouse button while I'm over that dot, and I drag down like this till I get to row 13, and then let go, I now have all my month names just filled in for me there. This is called autofill. And what it does is it follows a pattern. If you want the fancy $5 computer word for it, what it's doing is extrapolating based on the information you provided for it. There will be no test. You don't have to remember that, but that's the word. So we have our, so what it did when I selected those three cells that said January, February, and March, it went, oh, there's a pattern here. And the pattern is months of the year, right? So it just followed right along and filled in April and May and June and July and August and September and October and November and December. And then if we kept going, it would start over and give us January, February, March. And you can do the same thing with other stuff. For example, if I come over here, you don't need 3 entries. That's a very good question. I'll show you. So let's say I come over here and I go 3, enter, 6, enter, 9, and I have cells with 3, 6, 9. If I select those 3 cells, or even if I select 2 cells here, just the 6 and the 9, and then I click on the dot and drag it down, then I get the pattern, just like I would expect. And so, you know, it said, oh, look at that. They're counting by 3s. And it counted by 3s all the way up to 45. Great. However, there's a problem. If I'll go ahead and undo this. What's happening? So I'll go ahead and undo this. And I'll click on one of the cells, just the cell with the 9 in it. And I'll drag down from the little dot. And when I let go, wah, 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 I just get a bunch of 9s. The reason for that is by selecting the cells, I've told it where to look for the pattern. So when I selected just the cell that had the 9 in it, it went, we're doing 9s, I guess, and it just gave me a bunch of 9s. I can fix that by selecting either the 6 and the 9, or the 3, the 6, and the 9, or whatever I want to do. It's perfectly fine. But I need to, in this case at least with the numbers, I need to select at least 2 numbers for it to potentially find a pattern. If you have a more complicated pattern, you need more information in order to follow it. If we're like adding 3 and then subtracting 2 and then adding 3 and then subtracting 2, it's going to take it a sec to find that, right? So like, well, let's see, 3, 1, 4, 2. If I do that, whoop. Yeah, it didn't even figure that out. It's giving me 2.5 for some reason. So it's not perfect at that. You know, maybe if I give it more data, it'll figure it out. But regardless, that is autofill. One other useful thing I can do with autofill is I can do formulas that way. By the way, let me show you what happened with these formulas for just a sec. when we copied and pasted the formulas over here in column D, I had this original formula, B equal sign B3 minus C3 plus D2. When I came down here, I then had, but then when I copied the formula into cell D4, I then ended up with B4 minus C4 plus D3. And then on the next row, B5 minus C5 plus D4, and so on and so forth. Oh, yes, you do have to highlight the cells. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So, so you'll notice each row that I went down from the location of the original formula, I'm adding 1 to the row number so that it matches up. And so that to get the balance here on row 9, I'm looking at the existing balance from row 8, the new income number from row 9, and the new expense number from row 9, and adding, putting that all together. So, one other thing I can do with autofill is rather than copy and paste the formula, I can autofill it here. So I'm going to delete all of this, these extra ones, and just leave these 2 cells. And then I'm going to come up here, I'm going to click on cell D3 again. And this time, rather than copying and pasting, I'm going to move my mouse over the little dot till I get the cursor that's just black lines. And I'm going to drag the little dot down until I get to row 13. And it gives me the exact same result as if I copied and pasted. Copy and paste is useful in lots of situations, because the cells don't have to be together in order for you to get this kind of result. But if you just need to copy the formula up or down or left or right from where you are, then autofill works just fine in the same exact way. And you'll see the formulas are exactly the same as what we just talked about. There's even a quicker way to do that. If I undo it one more time, and I select cell D3 once again, and this time I go down to the little dot, and rather than dragging the dot, I just double click on it. Then it's going to do the exact same thing that I just did. This is called flash fill, and it's basically the fast version of autofill. What it does is it fills in information based on whatever pattern it has. In this case, it's a pattern of formulas where it just adds 1 to the row number as it goes down. Based on whatever pattern it has, it just goes down and fills in the rest of the data until it reaches the point where there's nothing next to it. And at that point, it stops. So that's really handy. And that's copy and paste and autofill. If y'all have questions online, go ahead and start typing those up. I'll be right back. All right. Well, let's go ahead and shift gears. And if y'all are typing questions, feel free to keep typing. That's perfectly fine. But if not, we're going to shift gears here. We can always circle back to the questions later on. So I'm going to switch over to the breakout sessions sheet down here at the bottom, just by clicking on that. And the breakout session sheet, what we've got here is I'm putting on some sort of a professional conference or a staff development day or something like that. And I've got these breakout sessions. There's one about time management at 9 o'clock. There's computer tips at 10. There's marketing at 1:30. And there's Excel at 3. And each session is an hour and a half long, as I've noted over here. So I'm using a formula here in cell C2 to add up to see when the end time for each session is. So in this case, I've got the 9 a.m. start time. And then over here, I've got the 10:30 a.m. ending time. And the formula that calculates that, now remember I said yesterday, dates and times are all done as sort of serial numbers. So you can add and subtract them just like you would any other number. So over here, what I've got, this formula is the sum of B2, that's the start time, and then E3, the end time over here. If I were to, let's say I just flash fill this formula down, that way I can get the end times for these sessions. I double clicked, flash fill on down, and we got a problem. The PC Tips session starts at 10 and looks like it ends at 10 too, so we're not going to have very much time for tips, right? So on with all of these cells. And if you look at the formula, you can see the reason why. When here in cell C3, it added 1 to each of the row numbers. So for this, for cell B3, that's what we wanted, right? We wanted to, rather than B2, the start time for time management, we wanted to use the start time in B3 for computer tips. However, it also added 1 to the row number over here. So instead of looking at cell E3 where my session length is, it's looking at cell E4, which is blank. So what I want to do is I want to write a version of this formula that I can quickly reproduce on all of these rows and get accurate information, right? So here's how I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go to the original formula in cell C2, and I'm going to come up here to the top, and where it says, I can just click in here anywhere, I guess, it doesn't matter. But I'm going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard to move over until I get between the E and the 3 here. So I've got the sum of B2, comma, E, and then my cursor is there. And then in front of the 3, I'm going to add a $sign. So I should have comma E $3. Then I'm going to press enter on my keyboard to lock in the new version of the formula. And I'm going to click on the cell again, and this time I'm going to double click the dot to flash fill again. And now I get an accurate count. You'll notice, or an accurate end time for all these sessions. You'll notice I have B2 and E3, B3 and E3, B4 and E3, B5 and E3. Well, really I have E $3. What this does, adding the $sign makes this what we call an absolute reference. And basically that's just a fancy way of saying you're telling Excel, don't change the next thing after the $sign. So when I copy and paste the formula somewhere else, or if I autofill it somewhere else, the 3 there, because it's after the $sign, will stay exactly the same. I don't have to worry about it looking on a different row for the information, because the information that I need is specifically on row 3 and nowhere else. If I want to make the column letter absolute as well, so that let's say I copied the formula over into another column somewhere, it's going to change columns on me. Like if I copy it now, and y'all don't have to follow me on this particular part, but if I copy it now over to column H, then you'll notice it's changed the formula to G2, the cell next to it still, and then J3. So J3 is over here on this row. Test, test, test. There we go. Okay. Now can you hear me all right? Good. I don't know what happened there. That's very strange. Thank you for letting me know. So what I did, so that makes this an absolute reference. The $E, $3 means exactly cell E3. Don't change the column. Don't change the row. So if in other parts of Excel we're going to see these absolute references with the dollar signs, and that's what that means is don't change this. Those, this column letter and this row number should stay exactly the same. There's another way to do this, though, that I actually like better. Let me show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select cell E3 over here. Just click on that or move to it with my arrow keys. And up here at the top, we mostly ignored it yesterday, and we've mostly ignored it so far today. Hit escape on your keyboard, and then up at the top left, and that'll take you out of editing the cell, or editing the formula. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select cell E3 where the session length is. And then we mostly ignored this name box up until now. Unmute. So I'm going to select this cell, cell E3 that has that length in it. And I'm going to come up here to the top to this name box. And rather than E3, I'm going to just type in the word length and press enter. When I do that, what it does is it names this particular cell length. So once that's happened, I can then use this cell name length in formulas all throughout my workbook. So for example, here in cell C2, rather than the sum of B2 and then $E, $3, I can get rid of the $E, $3 part, and I can just change this to length. And then close my parentheses, Shift 0, press enter on my keyboard, and it works exactly the same. I still get the same result. If I double click here to flash fill this version of the formula down, same deal, all the way down. There we go. Length works just the same as one of those absolute references with the dollar signs in it. But it's a little bit nicer for a human to read, and it can also, and you can use it throughout the entire workbook, not just on this sheet, because of course every sheet has a cell E3. If I use the word length in a formula from now on, then Excel is going to know not only do I mean cell E3, it's specifically cell E3 on this particular sheet, the breakout sessions sheet. So that's really, really handy, particularly if you're referring back and forth between sheets to do your calculations or to get information. You can name a cell. You can also name ranges in the same way and use them in formulas too. All right, so let's shift gears into our date formulas. We're going to do two formulas that have to do with dates today. So the first one that I want to do is, let me actually grab my, there we go. It helps to have the handout handy for this part so that I write it exactly correctly. Okay, here we go. So this is what we're going to do. In this example, I'm working as some sort of a freelance person, assistant, I don't know. But I've got a bunch of clients here, and I have a bunch of assignments that I've received from them. So what I want to do on this particular sheet is I want to calculate how many days I've had each assignment so that I can prioritize, right? So I've got column A has my client names. Column B has the date I received the assignment from the client. Column C has the is labeled number of days old, but it doesn't have anything in it. And column D has a description of what I'm supposed to be working on for the client. So what I want to do is click in cell C2 to put my formula there. Okay, so first of all, of course, because we're writing a formula, we're going to hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take we're going to use a new function. The new function is called today. So I'm going to type the word today. Then I'm going to open a set of parentheses, Shift 9, just like we have been doing. And then I'm going to close it right back, Shift 0. We've got a set of parentheses with nothing in between, not even a space. And the reason for that is on Earth. Okay. Oh, sound went. Is it back now? Are we good? So strange. I don't understand. Okay, well, we'll deal with it afterwards. Okay, so we open our set of parentheses, we close it back. The reason for that is that Excel Excel already has the information that it needs in order to do this function's job. And I'll tell you what that is in just a sec. Or actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and get into it. What the today function does is it puts today's date in wherever you drop it. So what we have so far is a formula that will display today's date. In fact, if I just press, don't do this with me, but I'll show you. If I just press enter right here, then it's going to give me that serial number that we saw yesterday, 44,800 and now 3 rather than 2. And that's the number of days that today is from January 1st, 1900. Of course, I could change this if I wanted to from a regular plain old number to a short date. And you'll notice when I move my mouse over short date, it actually shows me a preview. 8/30/2022, that's today, right? So I've got the today function in there. But what I want to do, of course, it's not terribly useful to just fill in the serial number for today's date. What I want to do is I want to subtract the date I received the assignment from today, which should give me the amount of time I have left to complete the assignment. So I'm going to put minus B2, press enter on my keyboard, and lo and behold, 56 is the answer here. Or excuse me, I misspoke a little bit. What I did was I subtracted B2 from today, which tells me I received the assignment on July 5th, 2022, and I've now had the assignment for 56 calendar days. We subtracted the date I received the assignment from today's date, and that told me how many days there were in between. So that's an example of, as I mentioned yesterday, you can subtract dates just like you would any other number in Excel because it stores them as serial numbers like that. If I double click on the little dot to auto or flash fill this down, I'm going to get I'm going to see how many days I've had each assignment. So this assignment I only got today. This assignment I've had for 258 days. So maybe I better get on that. And I could even sort them by that. So if I go up to the little arrow and click sort largest to smallest, I can see the oldest assignments on top and the newest assignments on the bottom. So that's one cool thing you can do with dates in Excel. I'm going to click on the date to sheet down here to show you another one. So when I click on that date to sheet, I've got a very similar setup here. But instead of the date I received the assignment, I have a due date over here in column B. And this time, I want to figure out how long I have left before I need to turn my assignment in. In other words, how many days do I have to complete this assignment? Here's the thing, though. I'm not going to be working on these assignments 7 days a week for every possible day between now and the due date, right? I'm probably going to take a weekend off. I'm probably going to, maybe I'm going to take, maybe there will be some holidays between then and now, or now and then, excuse me. So I want to take that into account as I'm trying to plan my work. So what I'm going to do is use another cool function called net workdays. I've clicked in the cell. I'm going to come up to the top and click in the formula bar to tell Excel to expect a formula. I'm going to hit my equal sign, or click in the formula bar, hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula, and then I'm going to type net work days, all one word, net work days. Now that's not network days as in like, a network, TV network or anything like that. It's net work days. And then I'm going to open my parentheses. So I'll do Shift 9. And you'll notice I'm being prompted for 3 arguments, one of which is optional. You can tell because it's in the square brackets. The first argument is start date. So that's going to be the earlier date of the 2 that I'm calculating. The second one is going to be end date. That's going to be the later date of what I'm calculating. And then the last one is holidays. That's the optional one because it's in square brackets. Okay, so the start date, what we're going to do is, the start date is today because we can't go back in time and work on the assignment in the past. We have to start today. So I'm going to type today, open the parentheses, and close them right back up. So today, left parenthesis, right parenthesis. Then I'm going to add, then I'm going to put a comma after that because that's my first argument there. My second argument, end date, is going to be the due date for the assignment, of course. So for the end date, I'm going to type B2 in this case because that's when it's due. And finally, I'm going to close my parentheses because we're not going to do the whole holidays thing for now. All right, so Shift 0 to close my parentheses, Enter on my keyboard, and now I get, negative 20. I'm 20 work days overdue on this assignment because it was due back on August 3rd. If I double-click the little dot to autofill this down or flash fill it down, I can see how I'm doing on the other assignments. I've got another one that's overdue, this one only by 7 work days, and I've got some that are far out in the future. But if you look at this one is due on September 8th, 2022, and it says 8 days is what I have. So if you look at the little calendar down here, I can see, okay, what it's doing is it's only calculating weekdays. It's not going to count any weekend days. So let's make sure that's right. 1, 2, 3, skip, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. There it is. So that worked just fine. So that tells me, so that will calculate the amount of time between any 2 dates, but skip weekends. And if you use the holidays argument, it will also skip holidays. The way that works is you have to list each holiday out as an individual date. So it's kind of a pain. So if you are taking if you're taking Christmas and Christmas Eve, then you put 12/24 in one cell and 12/25 in the next cell or whatever. And then you put, for the holidays argument, you put comma and then the range of cells that has your holidays listed in it. So that's how that works. All right, we're running a little low on time, so I'm going to go ahead and shift gears into the charts. That's our last thing for today. If you have questions about that stuff, you can feel free to drop them in the chat if you want to, or ask them after we deal with charts. But let's do this thing. So in our last example here on the charts sheet, we have the sales charts sheet. We have our 5 salespeople, and we have the number of units sold each quarter for 2 years. What I want to do is I want to represent this visually, because otherwise it's going to look like this, and it's going to be really hard to read, right? It's hard to get a feel for how everybody's doing just on the basis of this kind of jumble of numbers. So what I'm going to do is from A1 down to I6. Make sure you grab all of them. Don't leave out the column headers or the row labels over here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to come up to the top, click on our Insert tab, and we're going to click Recommended Charts. And when I click on that, it's going to give me this situation right here. So the charts that, well, Excel will try and look at your data and see like, oh, okay, like how would they want to, what might they want to do with this data? How might they want to represent it? And the ways that they suggest are pretty reasonable. One is called a clustered column chart, and what it is basically each quarter of these 2 years is going to be represented by a cluster of columns, and each column is going to represent an individual salesperson's sales numbers. So the green down here is Egan, who only had 134, and the orange over here is Falana, who had 796. So you can kind of compare them quarter by quarter, based on the heights of those columns. You could do a similar thing with a stacked column chart, but instead of grouping columns together and placing them separately, each little band of these columns that's a different color represents a different salesperson's sales numbers. Similarly, over here on we've got a clustered bar chart and a stacked bar chart, which are exactly the same thing but turned on their side, more or less. But instead of this, I want to choose a different kind of chart, and I can totally do that. I'm going to come up here to the top and click on the All Charts tab. When I do, I get a bunch of different options here. Column charts, line charts, bar charts, area charts, X and Y scatter plots, stock charts, surface charts, ooh, that's pretty wild, a radar chart, or a combo where you can combine 2 or more, well, I think it's just 2 types of charts. What I'm going to do is choose a line chart here. And there are a bunch of subtypes of line charts even. So there's 2 different variations on this same setup, one of which makes sense is the one we're going to use here in a second. And that's the one where each line represents a salesperson and each stop on the lines represents a quarter. This one over here has a line for each quarter, and then each stop is a salesperson. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we're not going to do that. We also have stacked line charts where they're all stacked on top of each other. You've got your 100% stacked line charts where it represents it as percentages rather than raw numbers. That's slightly different, but I find it hard to read. At least for this data, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then you've got variations that have markers for each data point. And then you have a 3D version, which is completely wild, and I don't know how anybody would read that. So we're going to stick with the original over here, and I'm going to click OK to drop it into my workbook. All right, now that it's in my workbook, I can make some changes to it if I want to. One key thing about this is once you create a chart inside your workbook, you'll want to look up at the top at the tabs up here in our ribbon like we talked about last week. Because you'll notice it's a little bit different. Rather than just the standard tabs that we've had up at the top all along, we now have an area called Chart Tools with a Design tab and a Format tab in them. If you're using a newer version of Excel, you might notice that it looks somewhat different or that it's listed somewhat different, but those two tabs should be there in some form or another. So we've got those. And we can do stuff like we can add elements to the charts. We can change the layout with this quick layout button. This down here where it says chart styles, we can change our chart to have various types of looks automatically. Excuse me. There's a bunch of different options here. You can kind of click through and see what they all look like. Some of them are more readable than others. Personally, you can use these up and down arrows to go between sets of styles. Or you can click this arrow down here, the More button, to show you a menu with all the options. Personally, my favorite is this, what I call the laser tag look. And that's always fun. So I'm going to choose that one. But you can choose whatever appeals to you. OK. Next to that, we have a button that switches our rows and columns if we need to do that for some reason. A button that selects that allows us to go back and select our data in case we missed some. We can change the type of chart altogether. We can move it to a different sheet if we want to. And then up here at the top, our Format tab is going to allow you to make some more specific changes to some of those styles. Over here, next to the chart, we have this plus sign. That's going to allow you to add and remove different what they call elements of the charts, different stylistic pieces of it. Whoa. Woo. For example, we've got our data labels right here that got added in there. I'm going to uncheck the box here to remove those. So now I just get the plain line rather than the raw numbers, because it's just too jumbled with that in place. You can remove the little axes here, the titles of axes, so you could like say quarters down here or number of units over here. You can add a copy of the table that the data came from if you wanted to. You could add error bars for statistical information. You can choose whether these grid lines show up in the background or not. You can choose whether there's a legend to show you which color goes with which salesperson. You can add a trend line for one particular salesperson or more. And you can do these up and down bars to show like movement from, I'm not exactly sure what they are trying to show with this, to be perfectly honest with you. But if you do statistics or something, I'm sure it's something that you'll probably use. Over here, you can change the styles just like we did up top. And then finally, you have this little funnel right here. That is your, that allows you to filter data from your chart. Those might be folks in Classroom B that are here for drop-in tech help. Can somebody pop over and just let them know we're about to get started? So, for example, let's say that Lesham is no longer with the company. If so, I'm going to uncheck the box next to their name. And I'm going to come down here and click Apply. And when I do that, that's going to remove the Lesham line, that yellow line, from the chart. So now I can just focus on the salespeople that are still with the company, basically. Or if I wanted to just focus on year 2 rather than year 1, I'm going to uncheck all the year 1 boxes here. And again, click Apply. And that's going to remove the year 2 data points and year 1 data points and allow me to focus on just year 2. If I want to get everything back, I just need to make sure both of the Select All check boxes are checked. And click Apply. And that is pretty much it. What questions does anybody, either here in the classroom or online, have for me before we wrap it up for today? Yeah, let me hand you that, actually. Here you go. I forgot to put it over there. All right, I don't see anything coming through online. If you do have questions later on, feel free. Oh, somebody's working. Oh, okay. Back on the date 2 sheet. Yes. Okay. What you got?
Tomorrow.
See you then. Does it include today's date? Okay. Does it include today's date in what sense? Okay, you're asking like how the calculation works. No. So if you look at this one that we were looking at a second ago, we had 8 as the result here. So when we count the number of actual weekdays between the two, we've got today's the 30th, so we're starting with the 31st. 1, 2, 3, skip, skip, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it was due, wait a second, hang on. Something's off. Hang on. Okay, let me try that again. I did not get much sleep. The baby kept me up pretty late last night. Okay, so let's try again. Oh, you're right. It stops on September 8th. I was misreading it. Okay, yeah. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're right. Okay, you're right. It does include it. So today, yes, today's included. So I'm guessing if we put something here, yeah, 1. Okay, yeah, that's it. Very good question. I learned something that I probably knew at some point, but have long since forgotten. Awesome. Any other questions before we wrap it up? I don't see anything else. If you do have other questions, feel free to let me know. You can shoot me an email, nsmith@cals.org. You can also ask tomorrow. That's perfectly fine. And we will pick back up with part 3 tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a fantastic rest of the day, y'all. Bye.